Right, okay, well, thanks everybody. Thanks. Welcome to another event at the Leeds Digital Festival. This event is called the Legal Innovation Virtual Panel, the future of client experience. And we've got an amazing panel for you this afternoon. So what I'll do in a second, I'll go through the panel and they'll tell us a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to pop around the screen and I'm going to start with Paul Mann. So Paul's a corporate partner and head of UK private equity at Squire Patton Boggs.
Thanks. Afternoon all. So yes, as you should do my introductions for me more often. That was perfect. So Paul Mann. I'm a corporate partner and the head of private equity at Squires. I trained with the firm, so I've been there coming up for 17 years now. So more years than I care to remember. And my practice is very much based around advising kind of owner manager businesses and also large kind of corporates as well as private equity. Not entirely sector specific, but I do a lot of transactions in the technology space.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. Go over to Patrick Grant. Patrick is the Ultra Project Director and tutor at the University of Law.
Yeah, it sounds quite exciting, Ultra, doesn't it? It's the University of Law Legal Tech Research Academy, which we formed about 3 years ago to sort of reflect the need for students to learn about legal tech and innovation. And as such, we're launching, in fact, an LLB with legal tech and innovation next year. I'm a practicing solicitor. I started out in criminal law and was sort of on my journey. I got into teaching whilst doing work at the University of Malaga, and the head of the course there was very into legal tech and started me reading Susskind, and that's here I am.
All right, thanks very much. Adam Roney. So Adam is the founder and CEO of Calls 9. Of course, Calls 9 are the organisers of today's event. So Adam, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So I originally trained as a solicitor at Eversheds, as it was then, before it became Eversheds Sutherland, quite a long time ago. And over the last 10 years or so, I've been working with law firms and professional services organisations, really helping them use technology to put the client experience at the centre of everything they do, to try and increase the productivity and the smoothness really of delivering those services, both inside their firms and externally.
Great, thanks, Adam. Over to Paul Smith now. Paul is head of professional services at Calls 9 and has had quite a career before he joined Calls 9 as well.
I won't go into all my jobs, but more recently, I was the global chairman of Eversheds Sutherland, so I put our merger with Sutherland in place and ran many of our global accounts, and many of those had to be done on technology platforms, and so that's where I developed my interest in technology. So I've been gone from the firm a year now and spent that year writing a book published by Sweet and Maxwell called The Real Deal: Law Firm Leadership That Works, which has a big chunky chapter on technology.
Yeah. And available at all good bookshops. Yeah,
absolutely available on Amazon, Thomson Reuters, the Australian Book Depository. You can get it anywhere.
Totally. There you go. Now we'll move on to Eve Roodhouse. Eve is the Chief Officer of Economic Development at Leeds City Council, and Eve and the Council have been a fantastic supporter of the Leeds Digital Festival over the years, so it's great to have her on the panel here.
Thanks very much. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say you can also order books from local independent bookshops and support them during the COVID-19 emergency.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thanks for the introduction. I have quite a broad remit at the council and very heavily involved at the moment, obviously, in the response to the COVID-19 emergency, but also thinking about recovery. And one of the activities that we got underway before the COVID-19 emergency was a piece of work to map the legal innovation sector across Leeds and the wider city region, which Julian can touch on a little when he does his introduction. Why did I lobby really heavily for that and advocate for that along with the Leeds Law Society? Well, because we've got a really strong digital sector in Leeds and we've got a really strong legal sector. But when I moved into my job almost 2 years ago now, I didn't see a lot of obvious things happening across the city around legal tech. So I was really, really keen to try and just surface everything that's going on across the city and the wider region in this area so that we can gain some competitive advantage. And I think this is going to be really, really critical as we come out of the kind of COVID-19 emergency, because innovation is going to be key.
That's great. Thanks, Eve. Next on to Julian Wells. As Eve just mentioned, Julian's been doing some work around legal tech. Julian's the director of Whitecap Consulting.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everyone. I'm Julian Wells. I'm a director at Whitecap, as Stuart says. Whitecap is a Leeds headquartered independent strategy consulting firm. We work across multiple sectors, and we help organisations and businesses to sort of plot their growth trajectory, to plan for the future. A lot of our work is in the financial sector, which is where a lot of my focus is. There's a lot of parallels with the with financial and professional services, and we've done a lot of work in fintech and other tech sectors. And as Eve mentioned, we're currently engaged in a piece of work focused on the Leeds City region, where we're mapping the legal tech and innovation landscape and assessing the current state of play in the region, and identifying what the opportunities for growth are and what are the actions that can be taken in the region to achieve that growth and that potential. So looking forward to the discussion today.
That's great. Thanks, Julian. And last but not least, David Palmer, and David is head of legal at TransUnion.
Thanks, Stuart. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm head of legal for the transaction side of TransUnion Information Group's business. I've held in-house roles with a number of companies, Google, Lloyds Banking Group, and currently TransUnion, after nearly 10 years in private practice down in London.
Thanks, David. Well, thanks, everybody. Great introductions there. And of course, today we're talking about the client experience and legal innovations. Patrick, yeah. Let's talk generally and wide about jobs of tomorrow. What do you think they're going to look like? What are the skills needed to improve the client experience in the legal sector?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. I always like to say that when it's a tricky one, but it is a really interesting question, because the jobs of tomorrow, you know, I always tell the students the best lawyer answer you can really give anybody first up is it depends, okay? And I think it does depend, because the legal sector is massive, actually. There's lots and lots of different areas that perhaps we as lawyers or a lot of people outside of the legal profession don't think of. So, you know, there is clear evidence that the corporate commercial area is changing. And you see that from training contracts offered by companies or firms like Clifford Chance. They have a new training contract called Ignite, which trains trainee lawyers in tech and innovation. Freshfields also do the same. And it's clear, therefore, that there's a demand. And I think that where big firms go, a lot of the smaller firms in the sector tend to follow. So we're going to see changes there. Family and crime, okay, which are two very, very important areas in the legal sector. A few weeks ago, I'd have said to you, well, I don't think there's actually going to be changes in the jobs that people do as criminal or as family lawyers. But, you know, now with COVID-19 and the fact that a lot of people have had to swap to online resourcing, I think there are going to be some changes. You know, it's funny, I think Susskind's book on online justice came out in January, and it couldn't have come out at a better time. He argues that the court process takes up a lot of time. He argues that, in fact, a lot of these smaller hearings can be done online, not by a judge in a courtroom, but by a judge on, you know, a platform similar to what we're using now. So whilst I would have said that family and crime are very, very hands-on in regard of sort of taking care of your client and client experience, I think there are going to be changes there. And I think the jobs of tomorrow are going to involve definitely a bit of adaptability and being able to use online platforms. And then, of course, there's the non-legal profession, okay? These are, for non-lawyers, these are points outside of the reserve activities. So the Legal Services Act 2000 reserved certain activities for solicitors and barristers, so rights of audience, arguing court, litigation, documents relating to probate, conveyancing, acting as a notary and administering oaths. And what we're seeing actually since then is the emergence of these new companies like Rocket Lawyer, where you can go on and type out, make a contract yourself, LegalZoom, which will make you lots of different legal documents, and of course Do Not Pay, which is this fantastic chatbot that can solve up to 1,000 legal problems. So I think the jobs of tomorrow are going to be slightly different in different fields, and I think that today's sort of issues demand that. But I also think at some point along the line, somebody's going to realize that all this investment in bricks and mortar that we're doing as lawyers is perhaps slightly defunct in many ways, because if we can work online, if we can talk to clients online, we can transact immediately, we can use Adobe Sign, I think the jobs are going to change. And I think it's, especially in the legal industry, it's demand that changes it. You know, traditionally we've been a very reactive industry for 50, 100 years, where people have come to see us. And I think now the demands are changing, the market's changing. So, you know, the skills needed, I think at the very base of it, improving a client's experience comes from the lawyer's knowledge and experience. So knowledge teaches us the process and the law, okay? And there's many areas of law which are a process. Conveyancing, you could convert to a big checklist and work your way down each part. In certain ways, you know, dealing with a theft in a police station is the same. Did this person take something? Was it dishonest? Did they intend to give it back? You're running through your questions and dealing with it as a process. So the knowledge element's important. The experience too, it teaches us the sort of potential kinks and problems that we need to guide our clients through. And that's the big area for client experience, is that us as lawyers are, you know, our job with our clients to manage their expectations, in my opinion. And that means to be able to signpost them, to be able in certain areas to hold the hand, to explain what's going to happen.
Okay. All right, thanks, Patrick. So Paul, Paul Mann, so just taking some of those thoughts of Patrick's then, on through your law firm, Squire Patton Boggs, how does the client experience feel for you at the moment? Does it feel it's changing quickly, and is that a demand from your law firm and other law firms, or are you seeing a demand from clients to change that experience?
I think both. I think for me, it's, you know, first and foremost, listening and understanding, which builds on, you know, Patrick's comments, what your client is looking for. So, you know, as people know, we've got 45 offices around the world in 20 countries. What a client who we are engaged in 20 countries and advising on would like versus a SME in two locations in the UK, or we're looking at some strategic advice for, is very, very different. And I think adapting that approach is really important. And also, again, ensuring the right fit, whether that be personality, whether that be background, whether that be style, is super important, because at the end of the day, you know, and then to build on what we've discussed, how you build technology into that, how you build reporting lines. Certain clients are very keen to have a weekly update on fees against budget and keep a genuine track of it. Other clients will be a bit more relaxed on that, and we'll have a conversation later in the process, at least optically. So I think we're continually reinventing ourselves, really, and working out, frankly, what work, you know, the challenge we all have is what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another, in a nice way. So understanding some of those metrics, you know, on some of our larger pitches globally, the tech angle we have and what we can do, you know, is on the platform is really, really important. You know, if a company has a large real estate portfolio and we can retain all that interest in one place and, you know, send them reminders when leases need renewing, it's a real value add. Equally, some other clients will look at it slightly different. So for me, it's evolving with the times, and really it's listening and hearing. Actually, you know, again, some clients might be quite industry led in their sector. It may be very specific, and our firm or another firm may be able to really add some insight in that. Others may be coming to us for more, I suppose, more commoditized services, or if you say it in that way, and actually be less concerned about industry expertise, but want a really responsive lawyer in a certain area. So it's listening and trying to understand what people want from the relationship.
So very, very human contact based approach.
Yeah.
So Adam, you're head of a technology firm. So I expect you to say that technology is a way forward. Patrick mentioned some service I'd never heard of. Was it don't pay your bills or something? Is chatbots the way forward, or do we still need that human contact?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I mean, I think that the technology is super important in terms of driving efficiency, and I think that's got to find its way down to the end client. But I do think the human side of things is more important than ever. And I don't know if anyone else's experience has been like this, but with the current situation, I think I've probably had more audio calls, more Skype calls, more Zoom calls than I've ever had before, really, because we can't lose that human-to-human relationship. And I think that that's not just in the legal sector. I think it's business as a whole. So I think the human side of things is really important. I think the technology, though, can enable new ways of working that weren't possible before. But I think, as Paul Mann says, it's about really that personal touch. And if you can deliver that at scale, then I think you're winning. And I think that's what a really great client experience feels like. And that's a wonderful blend of cutting edge technology, but really good human-to-human people skills as well.
Okay, that's great. Then. So on that people skills, Paul Smith, you're the former chairman of a global law firm. So obviously that leadership, that bringing your people with you, that must be incredibly important. And how important do you think leadership is at the moment in the legal sector?
Leadership is vital, I think, in two respects. One is the immediate crisis management, and everybody's read the legal press, and a lot of firms are suffering. So you have to take very effective action to maintain the cash flow. And a lot of firms were in a pretty bad state before we went into this crisis. And a staggering statistic that of the top 100 UK law firms, the top 20% had less than £1 million in cash reserves. So, conserving cash is a major preoccupation of leaders to make sure you survive, quite frankly. And having gone through the nightmare of 2008, I'm glad I'm not at the helm with this crisis. The other thing I'd be doing is really looking to the future and taking advantage of the fact that the market really is at a tipping point. So in terms of digital transformation, Paddy mentioned the bricks and mortar element. The first thing I'd be looking at is what is our real estate platform. How many offices have we got? Are there any opportunities to not go ahead with a new office move to get rid of lease commitments? And the reality is that, we aren't going to go back to work as we did before. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying that for the next few months, certainly, they don't expect more than 50% of their workforce to come back into the office because of social distance ruling. So, looking at survival and looking at how you take advantage of the change in the market is, I think, what I'd be doing as a leader right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. And just on that, I'm going to go to Eve now. And Eve, you touched on when you came into your role, you were talking to leaders in the tech sector, legal in the finance sector, and leaders in the legal sector. And how strong do you think all those sectors are at the moment? And how can we make the most of bringing together, for example, the legal and the tech sectors?
So one of the advantages of our economy in Leeds and the wider city region is we do have a broad-based economy. We probably have the economy that is most similar to the UK as a whole. So that stood us in good stead when we were coming out of the last kind of economic shock in sort of 2010, 2011 and beyond. So again, if you look at the forecasts that came out last week and then apply them regionally, we see probably the region that's going to be hit the hardest is the Midlands because of their connection to the strong connections to the automotive industry. In Leeds, I guess, again, because we have a broad-based economy, we'll see the impact playing out differently in different sectors, and you can see that now. So there's not a sector that isn't going to be touched by COVID-19. We are going to be in the deepest recession that most of us will have experienced in our lifetimes. I think probably all of us, coming out the other side of it. But having said that, I think we still should remain optimistic about our ability to come out of it well. Going into this in Leeds, we had a very strong digital sector. I think the digital sector remains strong through this because actually most able to flip to working from home and collaborating because very much used to that type of way of working, and a lot of business is done online as well. That's not to say that digital businesses don't need spaces in offices. They do need spaces in offices to collaborate and work differently. I think the legal sector in Leeds, probably same impacts as Paul just outlines. You know, there's across professional services is almost like the second wave hit by something like COVID-19, like an emergency like COVID-19, because you've got that change in manufacturing, retail, and right across the sector, and then that slowly but surely reduces all of the work for professional services companies. Every sector of the economy has innovated in response to COVID-19. I haven't yet had a chance to have detailed conversations with the legal sector about that, but I don't suspect it's any different. We know that everyone has been adopting technologies and enabling staff to work from home much at a rate that they've probably never done before. So actually, I think the trick in coming out of this strong is carrying on with this focus of conversation between the legal sector and the digital sector, particularly on a sort of where we've got the relationships building and clear in Leeds and the wider city region. So we can think about where those opportunities are, and the legal sector can probably think about how they might be pivoting and taking advantage of innovations they've had to make, and the digital sector can respond to some of that in the best way possible. So like I say, I think we are going to see a big hit, but I feel that we have got an opportunity to come out of it strong if we apply strong leadership now.
Yeah, thank you. And I think part of the differentiation of how companies can get through these difficult times is particularly that client experience, and we're talking generally about client experience today. And I'd just like to bring Julian in at this point. And Julian has done lots of work with FinTech North over the last few years, and obviously seen how the financial sector has taken the client experience and some very successful firms within the city region in the financial sector. I just wonder if you've seen any parallels between the successes of the financial sector and the legal sector.
I think my being relatively new to the legal sector, but having spent a lot of time in the financial sector, one of my early observations is that the legal sector is at a much earlier stage in its disruption and sort of the digitization of the sector than the financial services market is. So it's quite interesting to look at what's not present in the legal sector that you can see in financial services. I think most of the sort of the innovations that we've been hearing about in our work to date in the legal market have focused on using technology to do things faster, do things in a more automated way, provide things to clients provide the same services but in a better way, or deliver them at a lower cost, which means that the firm can operate at a lower cost. I think what's different in financial services is there's been a lot more innovation around business models and the way that products are actually designed, products and services are designed. And interestingly, a lot of what's now known as fintech, a lot of that came out of the last crisis that we went through. So in 2008, the banking sector went through a massive crash. There were a lot of issues that came out of that, but the digital economy started to emerge in the sort of the aftermath of the crisis, and fintech came about when people started to combine innovation in digital technology with the way that financial products and services worked, and formed new ways of doing business. If you think about things like peer-to-peer lending, for example, that emerged when people who understood lending and investing and saving got together with people that understood technology. And so I think there's quite a lot of opportunity in the legal sector to learn from that. When you look at the level of disruption that exists, and I've got a slide in front of me that you guys can't see, but it kind of compares maturity of the legal tech sector and the fintech sector, and it shows that on every measure the legal sector is at an early stage, whereas the financial services and fintech sector has matured in terms of building an ecosystem of startups and scale-ups. I'm talking globally now, not just not just the UK. Developing an environment where people can get funded for new businesses, new ideas. The regulatory environment kind of keeping pace and developing in line with the technology developments that are available, and also the adoption of new ways of doing business by B2B and B2C companies. So yeah, I think in summary, the legal sectors sort of can look at FS and the financial sector and try and learn from it. And I think that the sort of the client experience benefits, the really powerful benefits will come when we look beyond doing things faster and cheaper and look at how things can be done differently, and by doing them in a way that actually is built around what the customer wants rather than what is a good way for a firm to provide a product or service.
Right. Thanks, Julian. And David, obviously you've worked for a number of different companies, both client side and on the law firm side, and that quality of client experience, do you think it influences the choice of a service provider to the corporate client or the individual customer? Do you think they make that differentiation?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes kind of without saying that it does. I suppose it's worth exploring how it does that, because I don't think it's just simply as to whether you use a provider or not. Obviously, that's the binary decision at the outset. If you've had a very poor experience, you're very unlikely to go back to that provider. But I think also there's a sort of a gradient there, a sort of shades of grey, in terms of if you've had a poor experience, it might determine who you use within that provider. For example, you might choose to go for one particular department and avoid another, which across for that service provider is not good news. They want to be seen as being a total provider. You'd also could potentially decide to use them in a different way. We've had one experience where there was a particular provider in the region who had a reputation for being able to handle certain types of transactions at a certain level, but beyond a certain skill set, that person, that team was not really going to be able to help us.
I'll just quickly move on to Paul Mann there, and just sort of following on from that. So how do you listen to your clients to understand their demands and meet their expectations, particularly in a larger firm like yourselves, when you've got a lot of stuff going on and lots of staff and lots of clients?
Yeah, I think we try and always have a relationship partner or a partner lead to every relationship. So again, on the human form, there is someone the client can either ring with good, hopefully good, or less good feedback. I think we encourage, and it's an area our firm and a number of firms are developing, you're encouraging your kind of online platform to be able to enable clients to feedback or provide real-time kind of updates where possible, which obviously helps you kind of act quickly, because the challenge we all face is sometimes when you act and you deal with it, it's sometimes too late, or the relationship's got to a place that's harder to come back from. And I think, we're very keen that, when you present for a new, if you do a deal and you do it very well, hearing the feedback, but also if you put a proposal out, you win some, you lose some. It's a very competitive market, and we're all trying to find avenues to do better than the competition and stave off the competition. I think hearing, why you're appointed or why you've not been appointed, that's often more important sometimes. Just hear, okay, well, we got 7 or 8 things out of 10 right, but a couple of areas we probably didn't deem as being as important, actually the client really held in high regard. And you never get a one size fits all. Again, there's flexibility, and people like to hear different things. But I think, those experiences hopefully help you in the future. And I think, specifically on the tech angle, when we're doing some of our larger kind of tenders that involve multiple teams, actually engaging with all levels of our business is really important. So if I'm talking to I was going to say I'm relatively young, but I've got a big birthday next year. Nobody guessing what that number is. But, I talked to, say, when, where I was a trainee or where Adam was as a trainee a number of years ago, and actually getting people's feedback on how they think we could present something to a client better. The reality is they will say something that we have not thought of as partners or as seniors within the business. So allowing people to have that sense of belonging and feel they're part of something, but come up with a slightly different structure or approach, I think is a really good use of time where it's appropriate.
So I suppose it's that balance between the human side and the tech side, and building a process to make sure you're matching that up right from the start of those conversations right through to the end of the relationship. So Adam, I'm going to come over to you because I know you've been doing some work in this area. So can you just describe how you feel that the industry is changing in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think picking up on something that Paul has just said, I think because the legal sector is less automated than other sectors, and there is still this reliance on, I know my lawyer, I'll pick up the phone to my lawyer, I'll follow my lawyer from firm to firm almost. Actually, I think it encourages and ultimately is more responsive to that type of almost co-service design, if you like. So we see it in other sectors, particularly actually fintech and also health tech, but this concept of almost co-creation where you engage your stakeholder group in designing a service together. And I think that that's something actually that the legal sector is built for. It's got these amazing relationships and this ability to generate them and maintain them over time. And I think it's something that actually can call on a lot. And in fact, a lot of the work that we've done with law firms, with alternative legal service providers, and also networks as well to increasing amounts, is actually sitting down and saying, what is distinct about the way you interact with clients and how can we use digital to capture that and to enhance it? So my feeling really is it's about human-centric technology. It's not about necessarily replacing lawyers. It's about speeding up the things that have always been a bit of drudgery, and actually, if we're all honest, clients actually sort of don't necessarily want to pay for anyway, but it's about enhancing the relationship side of things. And the bigger firms, I think, have got a really interesting role to play in that. And I think to some extent, that's what's going to come out of the current situation, no doubt, is people like Paul and other people in other firms actually reaching out to clients and saying, okay, what can we do differently now we're in this situation to enhance that relationship? And I know some of that's sensitive, so it might not be able to be discussed right now, but I hope in time that will all come out and be a bit more obvious, because there's actually a lot of innovation that's happening right now because of the COVID-19 crisis.
That's great. Thanks for that, Adam. I'm going to jump into a question from our audience at the moment. So it's Joey Jones. Hi, Joey. Is asked a question which says, to me, the legal space needs to be more automated, allowing for customer input with automated output, which should reduce both demand on time as well as cost to the user. And Joey talks about an example of being seed legals. So if I go on to Paul Smith here, Paul, do you want to take this one? Do you see the sector really moving into that more automated way?
I think automation is already happening. I mean, if you look at tools like Kira and Luminance that take away thousands of hours that were spent by associates reading documents, and now that can be done in seconds. So the automation is happening. But I think at a wider level in terms of the client experience, I think what COVID-19 has shown us is that suddenly more of the world is open to digital interaction, is used to now looking at Amazon as how you buy things. And I think there is a real opportunity for law firms that can move away from their traditional partnership structures and really start thinking, which is heresy to some, which is that clients are customers, and customers have buying patterns and you can track their data. But a lot of law firms still operate on the basis of individual partners, individual teams, rather than going to market as a business using automation and using far more digital interaction. It's a balance, but I think it will tip more towards the digital in the coming years.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to flip over to Patrick at the moment, because obviously we're talking about client experience within the law firm, but we start with and the learning experience with law students. And do you within the University of Law and all of the universities that teach law, how much do you talk about and teach about the client experience and how they'll get involved in each touch point along the client journey?
Well, I think this is sort of two parts, just in case anyone's listening and they're not really sure what the client journey is in terms of law, and hopefully someone will correct me if I go off on a tangent here. But what I've done is just sort of split the client journey down. So there's always going to be a time before the client needs a lawyer, okay? And I've used personal injury as a good example. We'll call our client Barry. Every night Barry sits down to watch something on television, and in the break he's going to see an injury lawyers for you advert or something like that. That's our investment before he needs a lawyer. And that shows the need to sort of advertise effectively. The next step, Barry's out driving his car, gets hit by an uninsured driver, and he's going to need a lawyer at this stage. So he's already seen these adverts, but he's going to go on Google in any case and start trying to find a law firm and look at the website, perhaps with the adverts in his mind, see if that feels nice and familiar to him. And I think it's really important to bear in mind as well, in terms of the customer, this touch point as such, everybody really just looks on one page of Google. So we need to be looking at investing and making sure we're up there on the Google. The next thing Colin's going to do, he's going to get in touch with us. And I think like both Pauls have said, it's really important that that experience is good for him. He's either going to call us, pop in, send us a text, talk with our chat function on our website. And what we need to do is make sure that's as good an experience as possible, make him feel wanted and safe. He signs the deal with us, and then it's all about solid communication and being proactive, making sure he hasn't got that many questions, making sure that we warn him about future events. We're being risk averse on his behalf. So how are we teaching this? Well, I think, as somebody's already said, a lot of this is new to the legal profession. Julian touched on this. So what we've started out with is this year we've done a series of workshops at ULaw on digital branding, sales and marketing. And I think, as anyone who's a lawyer here will know, these aren't things that are traditionally taught to us on our legal practice course. So, I mean, to the extent that we did a workshop on sales this year with Sandler, who are a sales training company. And the first question he asked was, who in this room thinks that they're going to have to use sales in their job? And not one person put their hand up, which was fascinating. Do you know what I mean? And after an hour, and then we did the same with building your own digital brand, how to effectively understand what the point of a brand is and build it. But like I say, a lot's new, and there's all this sort of tech and innovation coming in too. So at ULaw, we're starting an LLB with innovation and technology, and it basically concentrates on innovation, 21st century legal practice, which is hugely important, and legal tech as such. But the areas that I've picked out, I think that are important to this discussion. Mapping the legal marketplace is something that I think is really, really important that clients learn, that students learn about. Learning how clients interact with legal services, just like the sort of current theme here. How do we actually interact with it? What do we want to get from our legal services? We're going to look as well at process mapping and how to improve the process. Again, this isn't, this is taught in the United States on their law degrees, but not in the United Kingdom, because we haven't really changed the way we train our lawyers yet. And of course, the final thing I think that's vital that we're teaching the students as well is the ethics in a changing marketplace. Because I think while we all talk about innovation, technology, chatbots, all of this, we need to realize as well that central to the legal profession is a trust in the legal profession. And if we lose the ethics or people lose trust, we lose this handle on the rule of law, which is our sort of job to uphold. And I think that sort of those four areas really are huge for training future lawyers.
Thanks, Sir Patrick. Thank you. And I'm going to flip back to David. And of course, you're a client of law firms. What type of experiences are really important to you as a client?
Yeah, I mean, the experiences that have been around for years and years and years are still very important in the modern technological economy. I mean, quality is taken as given. We need quality support, and that's why we go to certain providers. Speed to engagement is key. The onboarding, the conflict checks that law firms have to do, they have to be done, immediately or behind the scenes very, very quickly. We cannot afford the engagement to be slowed down by those sort of administrative level matters. Reliability. I think it's the reliability of engagement. It's knowing that we can pick the phone up and be talking to someone very, very quickly, or engaging with someone very, very quickly. That's key. I think we need to be happy that that the law firm is going to talk in the same language that as we do. That's quite important, and springs through that is honesty around competence and timescales. We need to be very confident that the law firm that's supporting us is being very, very honest with us, because if they let us down in any shape or form, it's going to reflect badly on us. And I think, frankly, you don't need to be overly ambitious around competence and timescales. We'd rather sort of have an honest position there. But if you are going to commit, be disciplined in that commitment. Is deliver on time when you say you're going to deliver, and in the way you're going to deliver. And I think the final thing, and this maybe is where you move then towards the more sort of looking to the future, is the enlightened view of the scope of the relationship. A lot of it is transactionally focused. But we'd want, springing out of that is a broader engagement relating to the things that will perhaps come with the engagement, with the appointment. So it may be appropriate in certain circumstances for that law firm to be offering free webinars, proactive and tailored email updates, secondments, and even cost services. The list is broad and long, and it depends on the particular relationship. But I think as technology improves, the ability to offer a broad range of perks of the relationship, that should broaden, and that's what I'd see sort of moving forward.
Well, I think in the spirit of the show must go on while we're waiting for other people. Rather fortunately, there's actually a question for the Pauls here. Questions Paul Mann and Paul Smith. Do you believe that current trainees at Squires and Eversheds are being taught the digital ways of interacting with clients, and more importantly, the ways of explaining to older clients how to use the technologies?
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm probably in the middle of that age bracket, so I'm not going to comment, and please everyone on the panel stay quiet. So it's a good question, and yeah, I think firms are doing that, and if they're not, they should be, because candidly that age bracket and the millennial group are generally very well advanced in those areas. So to my earlier point, it breeds a sense of belonging. It breeds a sense of, to one of Paul's earlier point, instead of the historic view of services, professional services firms being siloed, it builds a very much team ethic, that it's not just about the partner, or it's not just about the senior lead, it's about the entire team, including the trainees, including the paralegals, including the junior lawyers. And a number of people on the panel would say, and I'm sure a lot of people assume, DocuSign is used very, very regularly and very widely by clients. It isn't. Interestingly, COVID has led to a number of other clients, using DocuSign, and that's the route we're going down to sign documents at the moment. But it is not the norm. I know people on this panel are looking, going, "Is that real?" But and certain people I know well, but it isn't. But those innovations are really important, and to the point, where clients are less accustomed to them, it doesn't have to be an age thing. It may just be how people have got used to things. The challenge we always have in the sector a little bit is you don't know what you don't know, and if something changes materially, it's a big step. So I think having a team ethic, at all levels, to try and advance that team step, or if you are dealing with a junior lawyer at the client and you think you've got a nice innovative idea, well, if that's presented to your equivalent, then that hopefully flows up through the system and becomes the norm. So I do think it's important that the entire team is involved.
No, I completely agree, and I think there's been a difference in how firms have approached this, and I know that some, including my old firm, have a chief innovation officer. And the idea that one person would be, responsible for all innovation. And I think innovation is something that everybody in the firm, whatever their role, should be looking at how you can do what they do more efficiently, more better, how they can serve the client better. And to instill that ethos, I think is very important, that it isn't leadership and the management that decides innovation. It's that everybody has a responsibility to look for to how to advance change and make things more efficient. Being the most white-haired person on the call, I would say that very often it's the older consumers that have the time to actually engage with a lot of technology. The millennials do it automatically, and yet there are some dinosaurs in the profession. I interviewed one person for my book, a senior partner of a major firm. I said, "What's your approach to technology?" And he said, "I hope I'll retire before I have to do anything about it." But yeah, I mean, it's vital that we're all on the same page with this.
Do you think, following on from that, Paul, and both Pauls actually, that there's a resistance to this amongst some law firms? I mean, I suppose, in many ways, a lot of law firms the demand can remain, or the supply can remain inelastic. This is what we're going to do for you at this price because we know all the other firms are going to do that. So do you think that creates a resistance, or do you think people are actually starting to respond to the demands now?
I used to do pitches to global clients, and then I had to find people in the firm to deliver it for me. And I found that there were some people who got it and were flexible and were willing to embrace any change that was required. And then other people that were completely and utterly conservative and reluctant to do anything different to what they do already. So I think I guess it's the same in most organisations. You will have people who are willing to adapt, and I'm afraid some that are very comfortable doing what they're doing, and you just have to ignore those and get on with the people who are willing to change.
Patrick, I agree with that, and I think I remember going to something a few weeks ago from the University of Law, university talking about actually data analytics in sport and the advantages that can bring. And it was a really interesting discussion, sport close to my heart, but there was a panel talking about, certain managers, coaches have really taken it on and innovated, and as we all know, it's become more of the norm, but some still don't like it or necessarily think it can add value. Now, we all have our view of whether we think it can or not, and I suspect we'd largely agree. But Paul's right, certain relationships are ready for that next step and certain aren't or haven't necessarily considered it. So it is becoming more the norm, but I suppose it's pitching it at the right level with the right client and to suit their needs. Because if you go into David's earlier point, sometimes you've got 2 or 3 practice areas when you'd like 8 to 10. Is 8 to 10 better? Yeah, of course it is. But you don't necessarily go from 2 to 3 to 8 to 10 overnight. And if you try, you potentially lose the 2 to 3 you've already got. So it's trying to time it and just work out, again, listening, right? When is the time we think this could really add value? And then you try and display what you can do.
Yeah. Patrick, I would add as well, as I think as clients, we have a degree of responsibility to help our partner law firms to explore alternatives. I know from a personal experience within my own organization is we've got technophobes and technophiles. We've got people who totally embrace it and others who just can't stand it, and all of them are engaging with law firms. So the law firms are going to get very different experiences from a company, from a client, depending on who's engaging them. I would hope that I would be, asking the law firms I work with to look at, new ways of delivering the services or looking at different services. But I know some of my colleagues will be very happy with a very traditional kind of service that they've got. And that's a challenge, I think, for law firms to work out and explore the degree to which they prompt clients or just respond to clients' triggers.
Thank you, David. I want to move on to some of the questions. We've got a sort of list of questions forming here, which is quite exciting. Paul Bowen has asked us, lawyers still work in ways which are not how we live the rest of our lives, even more now. So and I think this sort of links into what David was saying, what kind of tools do you see coming to the fore?
Well, I think as you were saying, really, it's more trying to, I fully appreciate that clients, are different in terms of what they want. But I think in terms of the general trends in the market, and especially with in-house counsel clients who are millennials, they'll expect to buy legal services in the way that they buy stuff at home on Amazon. Self-service, far more digital interaction. I remember doing a presentation to a big global client where we'd won the mandate, and then I had to go and present to the legal team. And I'd come up with a very sort of whizzy platform that centralized everything. And the older lawyers in the team said, that's great, that's saved us a huge amount of work. And then a young lawyer in the corner said, I find all that very clunky. And I said, what do you mean clunky? That's state of the art. And she said, well, I want to buy my legal services like I buy off Amazon. I want to add to basket, it takes it off my credit card, and I get it delivered in a week's time. So, that the millennials, as they grow older and into more senior positions, will expect that kind of interaction with firms, I think.
Adam, well, welcome back. Do you have anything to sort of add to that? Did you pick up on the question?
I didn't know, but I'm sure this was timed so that Paul got a bit more airtime on the book. I think it's a good strategy, Mr. Smith. But
only mentioned it twice.
Patrick, sorry, what was the question?
It was a question from Paul Bowen, actually. Lawyers live in ways, work in ways which are not how we live the rest of our lives, even more now. So what tools do we see coming to the fore?
Yeah, I think that's one of the strange things about it is that actually, if you think about all the other things that you buy and you interact with in your life, it is a bit Dickensian. And some of that actually is not the fault of the lawyers, but actually is the fault of, well, perhaps not the fault, so nobody gets into blame here, but is the consequence of the regulators and the legislation and all the rest of it. And in fact, I was talking with Paul Berwin recently about this, and even some of the things around which documents you're allowed to sign electronically, which ones they need original copies of, actually are a major barrier to the way that the service can be provided. And if you think about it, I've always just thought this is ridiculous. That there's a signature. It's supposed to be this ultra secure method of guaranteeing a person is a person. And actually, it seems ultra old-fashioned, really, and there's lots of other technology we could be using to speed up that process. So ultimately, if we can't sign documents electronically across the board and consistently, and with anything involving property or anything that obviously needs to be executed as a deed, then that's problematic, particularly when you've got to witness it as well. You're not allowed to witness documents electronically either. There's just a whole raft of things that stop. And that just feels very, very old-fashioned, doesn't it, really? When you compare that to perhaps experience in financial services where they've got more integrated digital technology that means that you can be onboarded as a client, credit reference, credit checked almost instantaneously. We've done that in the fintech space for some of our other clients. So I think all of that really is part of the reason why it feels like when you go into the world of law, you're sort of to a point going back in time, really.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to hand the comparing duties back to Stuart, who's resurfaced there.
That's I'm back again. I'm not quite sure what's been happening in the last few minutes, so apologies if I double up on any questions. But one thing I'm really interested in is we're in the situation we're in, and how we're going to cope as a sector, and particularly as a city, coming out of the end and post this crisis. So I want to bring Eve in particular, but for Paul Mann, just want to see how you're already planning to come through the other side of this crisis with your own client base, and anything you're going to be doing differently over the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
I think we have continue to engage, actually. So I'm not really looking at it as saying when we come out the other side. Almost we're in it together. A number of, obviously, certain support we've been busier on as a firm, and a number of firms have, such as employment, such as, say, restructuring advice. Clearly, the M&A and private equity world that I inhabit is less active than it was 6 weeks ago. So, ironically, during this, Pete made the, I think we've had the conversation earlier where David made the point around the execution and Adam's point earlier about how archaic things are. I think it's allowing people to actually be a bit more innovative. And I know signing documents in a slightly different way is not innovative in the real world, but it actually is in the legal world. You know, client intake, I think a lot of firms have been quite good on some of those products out there that are very good. But I think as you go on with the client relationship, that's where the tech needs to improve, and actually mapping out how the relationship is going. So I almost feel that what is happening at the moment, which is obviously unprecedented and hopefully never to be repeated in anyone's lifetime, is almost almost forcing people to look at things differently. So in a way, you are doing Zoom calls, you know, Teams calls. You're having conversations with your clients on a really regular basis, and in a way, it is making you do things that you should already be doing. And as people will often say, and it's hard when you're in the midst of it. Downside always breeds opportunity. So from our perspective, we've been very on the front foot with, you know, kind of tools and webinars that David mentioned. And it's difficult because a lot of law firms are throwing a lot of information out there. So it's trying to grab people's attention on key areas and candidly against you, just keeping in contact, keeping talking with people. And even if that's a catch up, how's your family? Is everyone safe and well? It's not necessarily after the next X £1,000 of legal spend. It's just staying in touch on a level with them, and if they need support, helping them, and if they don't, people at the moment really appreciate the phone call because of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about keeping in touch. Jem Henderson from Tech Nation and myself, we run twice weekly calls for the tech sector. Anybody can jump in, and you find that the first 20 minutes or so about business things, then the rest of it is just about, you know, the kids, what you had for tea, or most importantly, where you can get hold of any bread flour, which is the key currency these days. And you mentioned about innovation in these times. You can really see that in perhaps particularly the health tech sector at the moment. I saw someone talking the other day, probably we've seen sort of 5 or 6 years worth of innovation within the last 2 or 3 months, and it's really speeded on a lot of that innovation. And Eve, if I can turn to you, because obviously the council's main focus of a lot of the efforts to get businesses through this crisis, particularly in businesses such as hospitality, and they've done lots of work on that. But do you just want to talk about some of the stuff the council's doing, and then also talk about how the digital sector can help, you know, the city and wider businesses get through this crisis?
Sure. So we're still very much in emergency structures at the council in terms of responding to the public health emergency. So we flipped into those structures just about 7 weeks ago now, which, gosh, feels like a lifetime in some ways, and seems to have gone at breakneck speed in a lot of other ways. Interesting, though, is that we're actually kind of now facing immediate challenges around the next phase in terms of how we might have new demands placed on us in the council to manage, for example, public spaces as more retailers and as more offices open back up. And whilst the lockdown restrictions haven't changed, you'll all have picked up on small things like Timpson's opening their concessionary shops that in supermarkets already. Greggs planning to open some of its stores in the northeast as testing. Now put that alongside potentially businesses starting to want to go back to their workplace in Leeds city centre. And if we don't manage it carefully, you could end up with a lot of aggro as people are trying to socially distance to queue to get into various shops and quite a lot of conflict happening. So we've got an emergency response that's very much focused on community and health in the first instance. We're now thinking about that next stage, but we're also keeping in mind on the strategic and the long term, you know. So in the last couple of weeks, starting to say, go back and test our inclusive growth strategy, just reconfirm all the focus of that. Is that still right? And, you know, kind of, are we still aligning within that? And what areas in that have really kind of come to the fore? And that's where I think innovation is going to be absolutely key, as I said earlier. And I think the digital sector can play its part in terms of making sure that some of this innovation that has kind of happened over this period is we just move on from that and move forwards, and we don't lose that pace and momentum in every sector that we've been working on. And then in sectors like law, where maybe partners have been a bit braver, taken more risks because they've had to, you know, on the technology side, then I would say, well, just think about how that risk might have paid off and what more might you do in your business to really kind of accelerate and elevate some of that. And then finally, I think it comes back to some of the early discussion about leadership as well. I think we've all got to kind of really be adaptive leaders over the next 12 to 18 months, 2 years. And in fact, potentially adaptive leadership is actually what we need full stop now in the environment we live in. So we need to be able to operate in both the strategic, operational, interpersonal domains and flick between those every day, every week, because we've got to respond to those changes in like, say, the COVID-19 impact. We've got to keep an eye on the horizon and think, well, actually, you know, where am I going? How do I achieve these things? And then on the interpersonal level, we've got to try and operate in these new environments. We've got to, you know, have sympathy for Paul and his 3-year-old. Well, you know, on some of my calls, I've got my 11-year-old coming to ask me for clarification around the homework. You know, it's that level of being able to operate in all those spaces that we'll see as well. So all of those things I think are going to be important for us as we push through and out, because it's going to be quite a long time in this extended period when lockdown starts to lift, but I think it'll be very gradual and we'll have to get used to different ways of operating.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. And I'm just worried now why my 14 and 16-year-olds have never once asked me to help them with their homework. It must be something I've done. I'm going to pop onto a question from the audience now from Chrissy Lightfoot, and some of you may know Chrissy, who's done a lot of work in legal futurist and in AI. And Chris is asking, how do you see the legal regulatory framework could be improved to enhance a more consumer-centric experience by lawyers and non-lawyers? So that's around improvements to legal regulatory framework. So I'm going to pass that on to a couple of people. First of all, Paul Smith, and then Patrick Grant. So Paul, do you want to take that? How can we improve the legal framework?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that people think that law is highly regulated, but as Paddy said at the beginning of the call, it tends to be only really in what are the reserved areas, you know, litigation and conveyancing wills, things that only solicitors can do. And if you look at the latest information coming out of the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, which is trying to encourage more people to come into the legal profession from a broader background, the trend is towards less regulation. But also we have the client perspective that we want, an ethical legal profession, one that we can trust. And I think this is going to be a real tension, because the regulatory authorities, I'm afraid the track record is to lag behind what's actually happening in the market. By the time they've caught up, the market's moved on again. So I think it's a very good question, because at the end of the day, if we are going to be more customer centric, equally we need customer protection. It's a very good question.
Thank you. Patrick, do you want to follow up? Are you on mute?
I knew I was going to do that at some stage. I could have been going on for ages as well. I think that's a really good question as well. And I think it's really tough to answer. I think at the bottom of all of it is this problem that, in my mind, there needs to be some kind of differentiation between lawyers and non-lawyers. Because if I go to a website to get a document produced, let's say, for most people in the public, they don't understand that these people aren't lawyers because they're not partaking in a reserved activity. These are non-lawyers. So if something goes wrong, they're going to walk down the pub or the Zoom chat with their mates in the days of COVID-19 and start saying, "Oh, my lawyers are rubbish," and that kind of chat goes on. And it's very, very difficult to establish trust in a system if you don't know what the system is. So I'm not sure what the answer is in terms of the regulatory framework, but what I do think is important is that there is going on some differentiation between lawyers and legal services and non-lawyers offering legal services, because like I say, otherwise we do really risk undermining the profession in many ways.
And Julian, if I may follow up with you, similar to that, and From your perspective, what do you think's missing from the legal industry in terms of innovation and digital transformation? You still on, Julian?
Yeah.
Have we lost?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Did you get the question there?
Yeah,
What do you think is missing from the legal industry, in your experience in many other industries through your consultancy?
Well, I think as I kind of indicated earlier, I think there's I haven't quite seen the scale of disruption in terms of the way that people. I think I'm going to come on video now. The way that business models or the way people actually run organisations and deliver services might change. The other thing is the sort of acceleration of the adoption of some of the practices. So, as the guys were talking just then, I was thinking about an example of mortgage advice and the mortgage advice process, and thinking how there are parallels and how it's really difficult to take a regulated process and to change it, or deliver it in a more creative way without losing the confidence of the customer, but also without breaking the regulatory regime that you're in. And I think what's started to happen in the field of mortgage advice is that confidence has crept along, and that there's an increased acceptance that automation of some things is okay.
No.
But also, we've had the vision where you can have a completely automated experience of receiving the mortgage advice process, and technology allows it, and it's totally possible to do it. But the reality is that the regulators aren't quite ready to say that that's okay yet, and the customer's not quite ready to do that yet either. But I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll get, or it might even be before that, we'll get to the point where a lot of people are happy to go through a mortgage advice process without talking to someone, without having a human interaction, and some won't be. And I guess we'll get to a similar point with legal services where some things will be okay. People have enough confidence in the process, the technology, and the regulatory protection around certain processes to do them without talking to someone. And then in other areas, we'll just continue, rightly so, to need a sort of a human interaction, a human touch, and that's where I think some of the stuff that Adam and the guys talk about at Calls 9 becomes really to the fore, where you start combining digital customer experience with actual kind of customer experience to deliver exactly what people want.
That's great. Thanks for that. I'm going to take another question from the audience and from Darija Shotra, and I'm going to pass this over to David Palmer. The question is, from an emotional point of view, how do you go about dealing with a disappointed / angry / stubborn client while staying diplomatic and professional at the same time? And I'm going to pass that to David, because he's been on both sides. A gamekeeper and a poacher, but I'm not sure which is which. But how do you do that? How did you used to deal with it when you were a lawyer, and how would you like your lawyers to deal with it now?
I still get it now. My clients are all internal, and they're very, very close. So it's a clear and present danger all the time that I have internal clients that don't like what I'm doing and become disappointed, angry, or stubborn. I mean, I think at the heart of it, you've got to, and this is not really about technology. This is about just engaging with them in a way which recognises their needs and what's the outcome that they want from it. As a fairly senior leader in the business, we are coached to a high degree to recognise the fact that we're actually quite a small unit as a business, and we've got to work together. And one of the things that we recognize is that actually everyone is coming at problems in their different ways that do rub up against other people's expectations of outcomes, and you've just got to start putting yourself in that other person's shoes. I mean, it's all pretty much common sense point of view. And as an in-house lawyer, there is a slight edge to that, because they do expect us to know everything about every aspect of law, and that can sometimes be quite challenging. But we try and sort of engage in a way that smooths the way, and that's often where external help. I said earlier about how there's got to be a degree of compatibility between us and the external lawyers. If we have to take the problem and take it outside, that's why it's so important to have an external law firm that supports us to the hilt. I hope that answers the question. It's a tricky one to answer.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you. Paul Mann, would you like to come into that? Any comments on that one?
I'm not sure for public consumption. No, I think joking aside, there is, and one of Paul Smith made the point. I'm sometimes overly simplistic to this, but we are ultimately, it's a service industry, and we're serving clients. Some of the law we do is very, very complicated. Some of the law we do isn't that complicated, but ultimately it's a customer base. And Patrick's point earlier that amazed me was saying, how many people think they'd have to get involved in sales and no one put their hand up. I mean, it's the more senior you get in organisations, frankly, a lot of your work is development and sales led. You have frustrations with clients. You have days where you think you've done everything right and get a report back that doesn't reflect it. You have other days where you think we've probably not done that 10 out of 10. Obviously that never happens, but if it does, and then clients say you've done an excellent job. So, it isn't easy. I think you've always got to be glass half full. And my view is, not everything goes perfectly. You're not going to win every pitch. You're not going to do every job 120% as the client would like you to. And I've seen one of Chris's comments, it's often what people know, and they might feel you've done a superb job. And actually, if you admit to yourself, you probably haven't, or they think you've done not a great job when you've probably pulled out all the stops. So I think it's taking a holistic view, Stuart, and just occasionally sitting back, reflecting. And I find sometimes, a night's sleep or an hour or two, one of my biggest disadvantages. I'm responsive, which clients love, but if something comes that isn't perfect, I'm keen to respond. I've taught myself over time, occasionally I've just got to take myself away from it, do something else, and then come back with a fresh mind and deal with it from there.
If I could chime in here. I mean, I come at this from a different area. I spent my sort of legal career dealing with people in the police stations and magistrates' courts, and there you really are dealing with some seriously grumpy clients. And I think that there's three things that I used to bear in mind. Number one, my old boss, who was just a wonderful criminal lawyer, told me you need skin as thick as a rhino to deal with this, because you're managing people's expectations, but you're managing people's expectations when they're seriously stressed. I mean, I think I touched on it earlier, but I'm always of the impression that, in a lot of areas of law, what we don't really tell students is that when you interact with legal services, it's a hugely stressful time for you. Family law, buying a house, criminal law, facing losing your liberty, it's really stressful. And you need to manage people's expectations. You need to be able to explain to them, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. This is how we're going to deal with it. But there will be times anyway when nothing you do is good enough, because if you've got someone who's just bottled 16 people in a nightclub, he ain't going to get a community service order. It doesn't matter how much he wants one. So you've got to be hard on. You've got to be able to manage the expectations. And I think you've got to realize at the bottom of it all, if you're a young lawyer going into it, as long as you're doing your best, don't take it to heart, because otherwise you can sort of go home with 1,000 people's problems every night, and I don't think that serves you very well as a lawyer either. But yeah, that's just my sort of part from crime and punishment, I think, in my early career.
That's great. Thanks for that. And just coming on to that with a relevant question from Thomas Nair in the audience, and is asking, how does the panel think more automation will affect the role of trainees at big firms? Will it fundamentally change the nature of training contracts? So again, how will we bring younger people into the sector and look after them? So Paul Smith, you have massive experience of bringing trainees and into the sector over the years. How do you think automation will change the way we work with trainees?
I mean, automation in one sense is less jobs for people, but equally, if we keep expanding what we do, it will create new and different jobs. And I think, in most law firms now, the majority of people that are providing the legal service are not solicitors, they're paralegals. And equally, paralegals are very important, and it's how we bring a career path for everybody, not just the lawyers, but everybody that works in a law firm. And I think that an optimistic view of automation and efficiency is that it frees lawyers up to do what they were trained to do, which is to give the benefit of their experience, their advice, to demonstrate empathy and understanding. And so I think there is an opportunity for lawyers to really practice what they've been trained to do. But equally, there will be a body of people, as you know, Evershed's had for many, many years. You know, volumes of people doing volume work, and that will only accelerate. But it's different people doing different tasks, and I think, you know, it's very easy to generalize as to what lawyers are and who lawyers are, and to generalize as to what they do.
Okay, thanks for that. And another question for the audience, and it's from Sakeb Mahboob. Given that creating good technology is expensive and will now become more expensive as technology becomes a more significant part of the client experience, do you think smaller firms who can't afford it will either perish or be acquired by bigger ones? So, David, do you want to take that one? Do you see the expensive technology fundamentally changing the legal sector?
I may not be the right person to ask this question to. Expensive technology change. I mean, the reality is, I mean, again, speaking from my own point of view, from being in-house, we are not going to pay for expensive technology, either within us as a business or externally. We're going to be looking for, so the most cost-efficient technology. So whatever innovations are out there are going to have cost in mind. I mean, the example I think of is, it's currently, I think, still beyond our ability as a owning a legal budget to afford any discovery type services. We just couldn't afford them. So I think there has to, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there has to be that sort of degree of its usual sort of cost benefit analysis. So any innovations have got to have the end customer in mind.
Yeah, and Eve, what's your thoughts on that? Do you feel we'll see a change?
Yeah, so what I was going to say is one of the early sessions we had around the research on legal tech and innovation indicated that there might be a marketplace for providers who provide services to smaller firms and help them to adopt technology and providing a service package to them, rather than smaller firms just completely disappearing as a consequence. So it'd be interesting to see how that might come out in research. And the other thing for me as well, sometimes smaller firms might be in a position to innovate faster and pivot business models faster. So I wouldn't rule out some smaller firms coming through if they're able to be a bit more agile in terms of responding to how digital is disrupting the sector, and that you might see some big firms actually, not being successful because they're not responding as fast and they're not able to move as to what clients want.
So, Julian, following up on that, you mentioned earlier the innovation that happened in the financial services sector after the crash of 2008 and 2009. What were your experience within that sector, and do you think there were any parallels with technology, either bringing new entrants or in effect putting a barrier up to new entrants?
Yeah, I think what always happens with technology in any sector is that over time it becomes more accessible and it becomes more flexible, and more people can use it. So I think what will happen, and we've had this question frequently in the discussions around legal tech and the project. We had a roundtable on Friday with a Harrogate group that included some of the people who joined today, Chrissy and Paul Berwin, who both been asking questions. There will be suppliers who focus on the smaller firm. There will be software that's not as bespoke, that's not as doesn't need sort of any complex deployment that people can access. So I mean, look at what we're doing today, video conferencing. I remember when I worked for a business that was based in London and Glasgow and Derby, and we brought in a video conferencing facility, and I don't know, we must have had to invest £10,000-12,000 to have the facility at that time. And now we've all just got it for free. We just use it, and we don't even have to download something for most of the conference tools you can use. So everything goes in that direction over time, and so I think that's what will happen. And I think there's some examples of that already.
Yeah, and Stuart, if I can just
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that hasn't necessarily happened yet with legal tech is that we don't have as many connecting elements. So it's harder to glue things together than it is in other sectors. And that's partly because of the immaturity of the space, but also because there has been historically, I'm not going to name any companies, a reticence to have open systems that talk to each other. And actually that's really important. So often what you find when you go into a big enterprise setting is that everything's kind of walled off and it's all closed off and these things just can't talk to each other. And if you compare that to financial services, where as a retailer, you can get a little Square subscription, you plug it into your iPad and you're taking credit card payments, through your cellular network. It's that type of connective glue, if you like, that we need across the sector as a whole. And every time we talk to a small firm, because we work with small firms as well as big firms, the barrier usually is, well, we've got this thing that we've used for the last 20 years. Can you talk to it? And oftentimes the answer is no, not because we don't want to, but because it won't talk to anything else. So I think there's a modernization that's going to happen in that software. I think more people will come in when they see there's an ecosystem there. And I think that's what's really exciting about what obviously Eve and Julian are working on, is sort of bringing it forward to say to people, actually 80% of law firms are small law firms. And it's actually quite a large addressable market. So it's worth thinking about. And actually, you've got incumbent software providers who, to some extent, frankly, have been a bit lazy and they've not modernized that software and they've not opened it up and they've not made it more accessible. So I think there's something there. And I think, to people working in the space, it's about not just the monolithic systems, but what's the connecting glue as well that actually joins other systems together and speeds up innovation.
And do you see more law firms going into niche services, so specialising, or will technology enable them to offer more services going forward?
I think they will probably have to offer, if they're going to offer a broad range of services, they will have to offer them differently. I mean, there are obvious examples that you can think of in terms of, say, online will writing, for example, but still backed by that human touch. So I think firms are going to have to think about what they do very differently, and they're going to have to learn. Almost, it's actually not necessarily about the technology; it's more learning about how can you modernise that delivery of that service. How can you change the way that ultimately you sell it and you get it through to a consumer. So I still think there's a space for firms that have lots of different capabilities, both probably to make their businesses resilient, but also as a consumer, you quite like being able to talk to the same firm about lots of different things. But they are going to have to fundamentally change how they deliver them over time.
Well, I think we've exhausted all the questions that we had to start with, and obviously we've had quite a few from the audience, which has just been great. So if anyone in the audience has got a last question, please get them in over the next couple of minutes. But I'd like to spin around the panel for one last time and just get people to give their thoughts of where the industry will go, particularly over the next sort of 12 to 18 months through this crisis and beyond, and how we can improve the customer experience within the industry over the next sort of year or two. So, Paul Smith, do you want to go first with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like the prophet of doom, but I think, we will, as we did in 2008, we lost some big names. Some firms are handling this okay, but some are really suffering. So I think there will be a different space with not the same people in it. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity for firms that have been talking about change and innovation and technology to really take advantage of the current situation. And I think some firms will accelerate rapidly ahead if they take the opportunities, and some will sadly fall by the wayside.
So we should have a sweep on who's going to be the legal layman's and the legal monzo. Patrick, about yourself, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Paul entirely. I think there's, I think if you're a law student watching this now and thinking, what's going to happen. Well, the truth is the future is whatever you want it to be. You know, within these problems, when we get things like what's going on at the moment and the future, where, like Paul says, you know, we're facing a depression, we're facing some issues, it's problem solving, which is basically the heart of what a lawyer does. It's problem solving that's going to get us out there. It's seeing opportunities, seeing change. And I think, you know, if I was a young lawyer now, it's dreadfully exciting, because actually you can look forward and you can say, this maybe is the sort of kick from behind that the legal industry is needed to really start changing. And it can be anything we want it to be. It can be, you know, we can learn if I was a law student now, I would be learning about innovation, entrepreneurship, tech. I'd be learning about problem solving, and I'd be looking for the areas that I could solve.
Just on that, Patrick, we just had a question that's literally just come through, and it says it's from Amalia Albu. Shouldn't innovation and technology be integrated in the current courses rather than taught separately to students?
Yeah, and I think it should, and I think it will in the future. I mean, like, it's been a common theme here that this is all very new for us as a legal sector. And what we tend to do, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I always think we sort of tend to follow on what's going on in the US legal sector a few years later. And, you know, they've got a lot of legal innovation and tech being taught at universities across the United States. I mean, Harvard has a fantastic base for it. But I think more importantly, the way we qualify as solicitors is going to change in the next few years. And that's going to change the way that we're taught as lawyers as well. Because now, you know, you go and do your legal practice course, you go to a law firm who train you in the way that they want you to be trained as a solicitor. But now you can do the exam, or sorry, in the future, you can be able to do the SRA entrance exam, get your legal work experience, and then go to a firm. So there is, and it's just like the American system, there is going to be more demand for what I like to call oven ready lawyers, you know, people who have got these skills. So I think, Amalia, is that then over the next couple of years, it will change, and these things will be taught to lawyers.
Okay. Thank you. Eve, what are your thoughts on the next sort of 18 months of the client experience within the sector and generally within the city?
So I suppose I'll set out what my hopes are, because I'm not the expert in the legal sector, but from my sort of slightly outside view, my hopes would be that the sector would continue to recruit young people. So irrespective of how tough things are, I'm hoping that we'll see firms, particularly large firms, continue with their apprenticeship and graduate recruitment, because the big mistake made in 2008-09 that many large professional services firms did not continue recruiting young people. I hope that we will see firms continue to embrace innovation. Oh, look, we've got another visitor. And with Paul. I'm loving all the visitors on this. It's brilliant. And then finally, also, I really hope for more collaboration. I think, you know, we see a lot of collaboration in health. And as Julian kind of talked about fintech, there's been an increasing collaboration there. I hope that the impact of COVID-19 will mean that people are more inclined to collaborate, and that the piece of work we're doing in Leeds and the wider city region will be a catalyst for that. So those are my hopes.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, I often say that Leeds is the most collaborative city and city region in the UK. So I think we'll see plenty of that going forward. So David, what are your thoughts on the sort of near future?
Yeah, well, again, I hope there's the silver lining will come out of the cloud that's been COVID-19, that it will be a launch pad to innovation. And I think if there's a plea to make as a client who's been listening to some very interesting points made by, honestly, the supply side, the provider side, is I think from a client point of view, I think it's very much use that as an opportunity to engage, talk with us, invite us to participate in that innovation. So I'd hope that there will be a fostering of some fairly detailed dialogues between us, and I think it's down to the clients to embrace that, to step outside of their shells. We can be quite conservative in our approach to technology as clients. So I'd love for this to be a golden opportunity for us to help shape that evolution, because I think it is an evolutionary curve we're on as a result of this.
Yeah, I think so. So, Paul Mann, what are your thoughts? Are you going to carry on bringing on trainees into Squire Patton Boggs and just make sure that we continue to bring on new people within the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. It's still the future, and it always will be. I agree with what Paul said earlier. In theory, if you automate more, it means less individuals, and we see that in sectors such as manufacturing. But I think it changes the way people will work. And actually, I don't have the answer, but I'm very intrigued to see how the sector is in 5, 10, 15 years, because I haven't quite got my finger on how significantly it will change, but it will change. And I think what's happening at the moment, whilst obviously it's horrendous for business, horrendous for a number of families, I think that the industry was starting to engage and really think we need to move the dial, and I think this will just make it happen. So that is a positive that comes out of it. But yeah, the student, the trainees, the paralegals are still very much the future, and I think this almost accelerates that importance of what they could do.
Yeah. In fact, while you're on, we've just got a question from Zaib Shahzad. Can you offer any practical tips for how junior lawyers and law students can stay connected with the digital and legal tech sector, specifically in Leeds?
I mean, I think there's, and I won't kind of name them all, there's certain ones on the panel. I think there's loads of good organisations. I think somebody's already mentioned how collaborated the region is. And this isn't a criticism. I think that has improved significantly in the last few years. I think it's always been collaborative, but Adam and I have had this conversation. I'm not necessarily sure certain areas have known where other areas are, and there's a lot of organisations now that help plug A to B and B to C. So I think there's a lot online. There's a number of webinars. There's a number of events. I would encourage them to be involved in as many of those groups as possible. And big view of my life is what you put in, you get out. So I think the more effort they make to get known in those circles, the better in the long term.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Julian. Again, I'm going to ask you for your general views, but we just had a question from Chris. And again, it'll be linking with some of the work you've done in the financial services sector. Resistance to change is not unique to the legal sector, but the sector's behind the curve on digital transformation. What in your opinion, is the most effective way to sell this new focus on innovation and the introduction of new technology into the sector?
The best way to sell it, I suppose, the current environment might not be a bad start, because there's the phrase I've kept referring to lately is necessity is the mother of invention, and I think that there'll be some dynamics that are being accelerated right now that'll be quite helpful. For me, I think what we'll see over the coming years is a gradual adoption of technology rather than a big bang. I think the pendulum will sort of slowly turn rather than as suddenly sort of thinking, wow, what happened last night? I think there'll be changes in the sort of skills and job side of things as well. I think some of the interesting dynamics that I want to keep an eye on are which direction the work goes in. So the balance between the large firms and the small firms, but also the role that the other professional services firms play in the sector in future, and how prominent we see the big four brands become. They're all very active in this space. I hadn't quite realised just how active they are until recently. But also the business model that's not that prominent in this sector that has become really popular in other spaces is the aggregator or marketplace model. And I have found myself talking to people recently about panels and the way that firms can provide some services into panels, and then people can then buy multiple services can buy multiple services from almost like a marketplace proposition. So I'm really interested to see if that kind of thing comes to the fore. What I've been made aware of is some models that are working that way right now, but also some that were previously launched into this space that were probably a bit early and didn't work. And maybe the time will be right for that kind of business over the coming years as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Julian. Adam, if you don't mind just summing up the entire last 2 hours for us in about 4 minutes, that would be wonderful. But give us your thoughts on where you think we're going, and and particularly, you've got that really unique experience of actually, being working in a law firm yourself and then building a technology company.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of want to talk, I suppose, a bit like Eve, I want to kind of give my hopes, and I do actually want to sort of finish in a really exciting sense in terms of where we can go, but it's not lost on me that this is a hugely traumatic time for business, families, and for people, and there's no getting away from that. So I don't want to be trite and sort of not acknowledge that. I think, though, that as a region, I think we are well prepared, to try and deal with it and come out the other side of it. And I think that it's interesting for me because when I started my training contract at Eversheds, as I was walking in, over 700 people were walking out. It was, the height of the financial crisis. The real estate market had collapsed. Lots of the other areas of the legal sector as a whole had collapsed, and so people were losing their jobs. It was a hugely traumatic time. And I think that what happened then was the beginning, maybe, of what Julian's sort of referring to in the fintech space, but perhaps more to happen. We were able to, as trainees at the time, we were given a mandate by the firm basically to look for innovation, look for ways that we can improve what we refer to as client service excellence then. And I was fortunate enough to probably be in the same position that people who are going into firms now are in, or are completing their legal education now are in, which is you've got fresh eyes. So you don't see it in the same way as people who've been in that business for the last 25 years. You just see it differently. You see it logically, you see it illogically as well, the things that shouldn't be there. And it gives you a wonderful opportunity to transform and to change things. So I think that for students who really engage with that, I think you can accelerate your career in completely different ways than perhaps you thought. I actually still bump into people now who work in the business unit that my innovation in Eversheds ultimately went on to create. So you really can have a career in innovation and digital transformation inside a law firm. So I think it's a very positive time to be a student, although you're going to have to think differently about what that education looks and feels like. I think for lawyers, some of it's the same old, which is it's time to think differently. It was time to think differently in 2008, 2009, and a lot of lawyers did, and a lot of things changed. Then I think maybe some things start to return to the way they were before. So I think that this will speed up that return to innovation. It's awesome to hear David talk about engage with clients and actually have that conversation, because quite frankly, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. And I think once you get over the initial nervousness of actually being able to do that, as I said, at the start of the thing, you can have amazingly meaningful conversations with people because you're a trusted advisor and you've got a relationship that, quite frankly, lots of businesses would die for. So I think for lawyers, it's a really golden opportunity as well.
I think we might have lost those three again, but keep an eye on Adam's Twitter profile for the name of the offending internet service provider. It seems a shame not to hear Adam sort of building towards a crescendo there. So it seems a great pity not to hear what he's got to say. I mean, gents, do you have any final thoughts, David, Paul, that you'd like to share on the basis that I think it might take 5 minutes for these three to get back in again?
I think Adam was almost at the crescendo, but I think we all realise that things are going to change. I think the mindset in 2008 was, well, let's just get over this and get back to what we used to do before. Whereas I really think this time it will completely transform the market. So I think it will be a very different crisis, which will create opportunities.
Yeah, Paul, have you got anything to add, Paul Mann, there?
No, as I've said a number of times, I think I agree with Paul. I think it's going to transform and it's going to make people think differently. And I think Adam just mentioned the trusted advisor status. I think one of the criticisms of the legal community, I think often if you look, certainly in the US, the trusted advisor is often the lawyer. Whereas I think more often than not in the UK, it's sometimes an advisor, sometimes a banker isn't often the lawyer. So I think this again gives an opportunity for the legal profession to thrust itself really in the forefront of their clients' minds if they get the messaging right.
I think that's probably a good point to leave it. Unless anyone has anything they'd like to add, we've got no questions left. So we just say thank you very much to the audience for bearing with us. Thank you to Paul Smith in London and Julian Wells, Paul Mann, David Palmer, Adam, Eve, and Stuart as well. Yeah, and I think thank you very much for listening. And if anyone's got any follow-up questions, you can always get in touch through the Calls 9 website.
And Patrick, thanks for stepping up. You did a great job there.
My pleasure. Any time, Paul. Any time.